a CTO in an early stage company, you have the autonomy and the authority to create your own job. However, and kind of acknowledge where you're not good at and where you're good at. But in my experience, and keep in mind, my experience might be skewed because obviously I have coming to me CTOs who have challenges. They're not going to be the ones who have sorted themselves out and they just come to me because I'm a nice to have. They come to me because they have a real problem. But in my experience, the CTOs that don't know themselves, they don't become aware what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they like doing, what they don't like doing, they make a road for their own back.
And we're back for another episode of the Startup Hustle. This is Matt Watson. Very excited to be joined today by Adelina Chalmers, who is the Geek Whisperer. We're going to talk about what a CTO does today, the evolving role of the CTO. She doesn't want me to say this, coaching and other kinds of consulting and advising to CTOs and tech companies, and has a lot of experience with what CTOs do and don't do. And I have my own crazy opinion. So I think it's going to be a very fascinating conversation today about what CTOs do, especially in early stage companies, and how that role changes a lot. Before we get started, I do want to remind you, if you're looking to hire software developers, maybe you have a CTO, but you need to hire some developers, you can check us out at fullscale.io. That's what my company does. We have 300 employees that do all kinds of software development at fullscale.io. Well, Adelina, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. Really excited to be here.
I'm sorry I called you a coach.
It's all right, I'll forgive you.
So I guess you're in Cambridge in the UK, which is really cool, and we don't have a lot of international guests on, so that's awesome. But I'd love to give us the quick 1 minute of your background. How did you get here? How did you become the Geek Whisperer?
Okay. I used to help companies launch out of Cambridge University, and at Cambridge University there's a lot of let's call it arrogance. People think that, they are the most intelligent people on the planet, which often they are. But I used to help them translate the latest material science or the latest technology they invented into business pitches, into investment pitches. And I noticed a lot of chief technology officers, which were essentially the scientists or technologists that were launching this latest cutting edge forward-leading tech, often they were being kicked out of their own companies after a few years. And I decided to figure out, why is that happening?
Well, so tell me, from these early stage companies, when somebody gets the label of CTO, let's say a very early stage, what does that mean? What does that mean to be a CTO of a startup to you?
Depends on the size of the startup and how long they've been going, right? I made a startup in Cambridge that's been going 20 years. I'm not sure you can still call it a startup.
No,
exactly. So to me, CTO, let's say in a startup as big as 10, 20 people with, let's say, 5 engineers. A CTO with 5 engineers is really someone who's essentially a principal engineer / engineering manager under the label of CTO. That's my experience, having worked with a few hundred people who call themselves CTO.
But isn't part of the difference is if you're a C-level position, it's also more about the strategy and the ownership of whatever it is you're doing, right? Where in a smaller company, if you're a principal engineer, you don't really have any ownership in anything, probably. I mean, you have ownership of some little feature or feature set of the app, but you don't have feature set of the entire technology strategy.
But your technology strategy, when you're a small company that's seeking product market fit, is literally create stuff and hope some of it sticks.
Sure.
It's feature delivery, isn't it? There's nothing more complex than that. So this is why I'm saying that a chief technology officer, underlining the word chief here, is not really, in a startup of 5 engineers, let's say, is not the same chief technology officer that they would be if they had 50 engineers, if they had 500 engineers or 5,000.
Well, but we see the same problem in all job titles in all types of industry, right? It's no different than being the chief sales officer. So like at Full Scale, we have a chief sales officer and then only two other salespeople. He only manages two other people, right? It's not like he
Yeah.
manages 100 salespeople. But
Yeah.
it's the same. But it's the same kind of analogy, though, right? He still owns all of the strategy. He's in charge of sales. He drives all of it. So does he have the wrong title? Do I need to change his title today to director of sales?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. I mean, to me, the challenge I have with that, I mean, in sales, they usually go through a process to think deeper about the customer, the market, how they're going to position this. In my experience, a lot of chief technology officers that evolve from a startup, they don't necessarily grade their operating system to being
Right.
a people manager. They
Right.
almost see themselves as the alpha geek. And I
Right.
have seen this with chief sales officers as well, to be fair.
Sure.
You know, who are very great salesmen or women, but actually
the
they're
closer.
terrible. Yeah, but they're
It's actually
terrible
good.
at
It's
teaching
actually a good
others, right?
analogy because they're the closer.
Yeah, yeah. But it just, I've seen so many chief technology officers who don't
Right.
upgrade their mental operating system when they have more people under them. And that's
So-
what I'm concerned with.
In some ways, I would say that might be me. I don't like to manage people or processes. Like that's boring. I don't. No, I have no interest in that. I'd rather hire a VP of engineering and go tell them to do that.
And
Right?
that's very common. I've seen that in probably 60% of the startup companies I've worked with in the last 10
So-
years.
You know, as a CTO, if I was hiring a CTO for my company, I'd rather than be like the mad scientist in the basement somewhere working on all sorts of crazy stuff, innovating and doing new things. And now maybe none of that goes straight to production, right? Like they're innovating, they're doing things, and then they hand that off to the team and say, "Okay, I help prototype something, go figure it out, figure out how to take this to actually take it to market now." Like, do you see that as being part of the role as they evolve? Or I guess it depends a lot on the company and what the company needs.
Well, so in my experience, and that's actually one of the 7 different CTO roles that I've discovered so far.
Okay.
But in my experience, that is a luxury that the startup can't afford. If you think about it, when you're a startup, all you have to do is make product happen, make something happen that people will buy, right? So you can't often afford to have someone who's the mad scientist who looks around corners, which is what the CTO does in a much bigger company. And that's, I think, the key. This is where the CTO role starts to fracture between a company that's 20 engineers and a company that has 200 engineers.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally agree. Friend of mine on LinkedIn posted the other day. I post about like what CTO stands for, and I guess I should mention I put like in an early stage company it stands for like Chief Trello Officer, Chief TypeScript Officer, like Chief Troubleshooting Officer. Like that's kind of the job. And your point, it's more like being an engineer. But
Yeah.
he commented something I thought was really great. He's like, an early stage company, you're like the Chief Today Officer. What are we getting
Yeah.
done today? We got to get this shit done. We got to get to production. We got to figure out if customers are going to use it. Is this company going to survive, right? But as the company grows, you kind of become like the Chief Tomorrow Officer. Like the role totally changes. And then you spend all of your time actually working on like planning and road mapping, and like half the stuff never happens, or if it does happen, it happens like, and it takes like 3 times longer than it should take. Instead of being the Chief Today Officer, we're like always running like with a sense of urgency. Like we got to get this production, we got to get it done. think that's a
100%.
fair-
I love that analogy, and I'm gonna mention you in the future post. I absolutely agree 100% with that analogy. And the question of when do you become a chief tomorrow officer versus
Yeah.
chief today officer? This is what I've found, that often people don't make that mental transition, even though the environment around them has changed.
Yeah, and I can't be that guy. I can't be the Chief Tomorrow Officer. It just like kills me inside. Like I can't sit around and talk about all the things that we're gonna do in the future. Like I want to go do something now. I want to go win. Like let's go build something. Let's ship something. Let's accomplish something. My DNA doesn't even allow the Tomorrow Officer. I can't even do it.
And this is the thing, that if you're in a startup environment, your attitude and interest and priorities match that perfectly. If,
Yeah.
however, you worked in a corporation where your entire job was essentially R&D, research
Yeah.
and development, testing stuff, looking, one of the CTOs of a very successful company here in the UK said to me, my job was to look around corners. 5+
Yeah.
years into the future, which means that you have to go to conferences and hear what's buzzing, what's happening in industry. That's not what the startup CTO would be doing. They don't have time for that. They don't have that luxury. And
Yeah.
someone with your interest, it sounds like the kind of more corporate visionary CTO is not really who you are. And this is why I'm saying that I think I counted 7 different types of CTO identities that I discovered.
Okay, I want to hear the 7.
My God,
You
I have to see. Let's see if I remember them, because honestly, it was such a. So definitely, obviously, you have the startup CTO, which is essentially, let's say up to 20 engineers, where you are an engineer yourself, and also you probably are as well an engineering manager, managing engineers, and then beyond 15, 20 engineers. So that's the startup CTO side of it. But then you can have the CTO. This is where it kind of starts to fraction into different kind of jobs. So for example, another kind of CTO is, as the company grows, this is where I find that the CTO role changes drastically. So either the person is a doer, and then they become essentially an operational CTO. You're someone who sets up processes and ensure that things get done. And that's when also you discover what you like, because someone like you would probably get quite bored of that, from what I hear. Is that true? Would you say
Yeah.
that's kind of, yeah? And then, so that's when the CTO role starts to fracture between a people manager or a visionary. And this is where I've seen a lot of companies, as I said, I think earlier, about 60% of them hiring a VP of engineering, because the CTO is actually someone who prefers to be a visionary, who creates prototypes, but really, really doesn't like managing people, doesn't like worrying about operations, and actually often doesn't really like road mapping and things like that at all. Does that make sense so far?
I think I enjoy
Tell
the
me.
road mapping part of it. I'm okay with the high level product planning and road mapping part of it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care about going through every single Jira ticket in the backlog and arguing about how long it's going to take and story points. Like, that kills me inside. But
Yeah.
the higher level planning, I enjoy.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that it's really important to understand yourself, and this is why I bang on about self-awareness quite a lot, because one of the problems that I see people having is that they don't have the self-awareness to realize that they don't like doing operations, but they might like road mapping.
Yeah.
So this is where self-awareness is so important, because the irony is that as a CTO in an early stage company, you have the autonomy and the authority to create your own job. However, and kind of acknowledge where you're not good at and where you're good at. But in my experience, and keep in mind, my experience might be skewed, because obviously I have coming to me CTOs who have challenges.
Yeah.
They're not going to be the ones who have sorted themselves out and they just come to me because I'm a nice to have. They come to me because I have a real problem. But in my experience, the CTOs that don't know themselves, they don't become aware what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they like doing, what they don't like doing, they make a road for their own back, because they act as the alpha geek when the company doesn't need an alpha geek. The company needs a people manager, a strategist, maybe an operations person, but definitely not just another engineer. And this is where, in my experience, a lot of them get stuck.
Well, there's definitely some anti-patterns here, right? Where in some companies, the CTO wants to be the hero all the time. They want to be the blocker of everything. A friend of mine always referred to this person as like the tiny general. It's like they're the ones that wants to be in charge of everything and get their hands in everything. But I think inevitably, like you said, like they can be like the chief geek where they might want to be the hero all the time and
Mm-hmm.
they want to own certain things. You've that's the cycle that definitely have to break. Like you have to get out of the way of being involved in production related things and being a blocker all the time.
Exactly. So far we've labeled the CTO of a startup. Then you have the CTO of a scale up who's in charge of delivery and operations, right? Then you also have, this is where it starts to fracture with a CTO who's a technical visionary, which it sounds like it's not your piece, there's not your cup of tea, is it? That's not the sort of thing that you personally would be interested in. Are you correct?
I would describe myself more as like product visionary, not technical visionary.
Yeah, brilliant. And this is the thing. This is why you get stuff done. Because you just like to ship, right? Deliver something and see how customers react to that. Is it adding value? No. Okay, let's change it again, isn't it?
Well, and we should talk about this for a minute because I personally, after doing this for so long, I don't even really care all that much about what the code looks like, what the code is written in. If it's in TDD or solid or microservices, like I don't care about any of it. I don't care. I just care, can we deliver something to our to our customers, and the customer's going to use it and they're going to like it? Because I know if you write the world's perfect code in solid or whatever it is, in like 3 to 5 years, that code's all going to get deleted. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's all going to be crap anyways. So I'm not saying that the code should be an absolute mess, garbage pile. I'm not saying that. But just like simple, clean code. People that spend all their time trying to make the world's perfect code are focused on the wrong problem. They need to be focused on building like a product. Because I wrote a blog post about this one day, and it went viral, about how my entire career was now technical debt. My 20-year career, everything I've ever built is either technical debt, it's been retired, it's been deleted, it's all gone. All of it.
It's legacy
it didn't
software
matter.
that that everybody wants to replace, right?
Yes, all of it.
Yeah.
And everything you ever do will eventually end up there. Now, there are some exceptions to that. I'm sure somebody wrote some software that still powers nuclear missiles today and has never been changed or whatever. Fine. Okay, you get that. Your code's in some ATM and it works perfectly fine. I get it. But for most of us, like it has a short lifespan anyways. But my point is, like, I've always just, as my career has evolved, I've become more and more focused on just what matters to the customer and delivering to the customer, and worried less about the nuance of what the code looks like. I don't even care.
But here you are. You are my fourth type of CTO. So the fourth type of CTO is
I want to be number 1, not number 4.
Wait, they're not in order of importance, okay? This is just
okay.
Number 4, as in, I start with the smallest one and end up with a huge biggest one, all right? But number 4 is, so you have the startup, you have the scale-up CTO, the technical visionary who looks 5 steps ahead. But then you have the business strategist CTO, which is what it sounds like you are, right? So normally it's a mature commercial business. Normally you have 250 plus staff. You're essentially a business person who understands business as well as technology, and you can scale yourself through lots of people. And that's what I think you are. You're at number 4. I can tell you the others if you like as well, but I would say you're number 4. I mean, so number 5 is another, and I've worked with all of these types of CTOs, okay? So, and there might be others that I haven't worked with yet. This is just my own experience. It's not something I've read in books or anything like that. But number 5 was the CTO in a corporation that's in charge of IT. So one of the things that, you see where they're under a CIO usually, and they're responsible to make sure that the IT works. The engineers can build the product on that, supported by the IT, but they're not actually building any product. Does that make any sense? That's pure.
Yeah, sure.
One of the guys on a panel that was on last year when I gave a keynote, he called it the server huggers. So this is the CTO of the IT, the server hugger. That was brilliant. And then you have in big corporations, like Fujitsu, Microsoft, TOS, these huge companies, where they're an account CTO, where they're serving a particular industry. Like, for example, the public sector CTO, which in the UK, for example, let's say they deal with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, or the Department of Defense, or the Post Office. Famously, we had an issue here a few months ago. So that's, you see what I mean? So that's a completely different type of CTO altogether again. And then the seventh type of CTO, which I think we spoke about a little bit earlier, is the R&D CTO in a corporation, which has the office of the CTO. That's the problem that people, and these are the seven CTO roles that I've observed in my line of work. Now, I'm sure there probably are a few others that I haven't mentioned, but that's the patterns.
Okay, I've got number 8 for you.
Okay.
And so at a company like Full Scale, we do software development for other people, right? We have 60 different customers. We have 250 engineers. If you need help, check us out, fullscale.io. The CTO at our company would be more of a sales/advisory role, right?
Yeah. So
they would meet with our customers and advise them on what they need, and it's kind of like a sales engineer role. And I think in other system integrators, the CTO might also be more of a sales engineer role.
But that sounds like the account CTO that I was talking about.
Okay.
You know, the account CTO. I work. I've seen them or worked with them in big corporations, but obviously in smaller businesses with a similar model, I'm sure they have the same kind of thing where. That's why I called it the account CTO. They have kind of customers in particular industries that they work with. And essentially, and here's the irony, right? An account CTO in a scale up, smaller company, not an established corporation the size of Microsoft, let's say, an account CTO in that kind of business is often much more sales focused and much more delivery, bottom line value focused than an account CTO in a corporation, in my experience.
Sure. Yeah.
And you know why, right?
No, that makes total sense. Sales is obviously one of the most, highly paid job there is. And actually, I think for a lot of people who become CTOs, any of these types of CTOs, it's actually a progression for some of them. Like I have a friend that went to work at Microsoft and helps do sales for Azure or whatever. Like technical sales is actually a career path, I think, for CTOs and engineering managers they never think about. But
yeah. And I think also, there is a particular type of CTO, which was number 3 I mentioned, about the 5 steps ahead visionary CTO from a startup/scale up that doesn't quite really like people management and delivery. That particular type of CTO often feels that sales is dirty. Sales is a dirty word.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that, isn't it? A lot of that culture in engineering.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute. I talked to a guy actually earlier this week, and we had this exact conversation. He's like, before when I was a CTO and engineering manager, I didn't care about the customers. I just wanted to build the stuff, and they can just use it and whatever. I don't really care.
Build it and they will come, right?
Yeah, and now he's like, well, now as a business owner and as a founder who's trying to build this, I realized that like sales and marketing is literally everything. And it's 10 times harder than building the product. Like building the product was actually the easy part. Figuring out how to sell the thing is like an impossible nightmare. Like the Rubik's Cube is easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
But people don't understand that unless they've like had to go through it. And maybe that's what's different about me over my career is I have had to go through all of those progressions. Yeah. And now as a business owner, I spend most of my time on marketing.
I know. It's funny, isn't it? So 2 points here. Do you know the company ARM, right? That makes the microchips. Yeah. So one of their founders and he's a kind of been a bit of a mentor for me in the last few years. And I was having a chat with him, and one of the conversations we were having, which was actually a podcast recording that we did with him 5 years ago, he said, well, we used to bring our engineers in the sales meetings so they can understand where this whole need comes, because creating code without the context of delivery actually makes the engineers, frankly, thinking that they're delivering amazing value when often something like this doesn't even sell. They have no idea that what they're creating doesn't sell. And it's really important, I think, to connect the engineers to the value they're meant to be creating for the customer.
I 100% agree, and I credit that to my entire career and everything I've ever done, because the first job I ever had at 19 was at a tiny company, and I had to talk to customers. I talked to customers directly. I had to fly around the country, install our software. This was like an old desktop kind of system, client server kind of system. So I was traveling around the country, installing it, talk to the customers, getting their feedback. I'm like on an airplane, making changes to the software, pushing updates to them. To your point, like I'm dealing with a customer every day. I understand their problems. I understand what they want, and I'm just trying to help them solve them, right? Where a lot of software developers are like in some office somewhere in a cubicle, and they are completely isolated from who the users are, who the customers are, why this thing exists, or how it's being used. And that's a problem. Like we need developers to be more involved in the customers and the users so they understand the perspective.
100%. And this is, a lot of engineers have the attitude of build it and they will come because they don't actually understand sales and they don't understand where is this going. One engineer I spoke to who became a CEO himself said to me that he had a shock when the CEO of the company had worked at before he started his own company showed him and his team that the product they'd been working on for the last 3 years had produced zero sales. They were all super proud of working on this thing. And then the CEO actually said to them, guys, this has been almost an R&D project for us. We discovered it doesn't sell.
Yeah.
And it was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think keeping the engineer isolated and away from the customer is not doing engineers any good anyway.
Well, and that's part of my point earlier. It's like as an engineer, if you're all excited about how how you did TDD or Solid, or I built this beautiful CI/CD thing, or this cloud deployment and whatever, and you never talk to the customer, like you're excited about all these things, and you actually go talk to the users, and the users are like, this thing is crap. I hate it. Right? Like you're focused on the wrong thing. Like you got to focus on what the users think, because all that technical stuff that you're all excited about, you're excited about, and I get it, and you enjoy it and whatever, but literally nobody else does. Like the users that pay the bills, it's like you got to focus on them too. Like you cannot forget about them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it sounds like your career set you on a brilliant trajectory because you had to face that reality very early on at the age of 19. And to you, quite frankly, because you had to deal with it so early on in your career, you might not have had the time. I'm taking a bit of credit away from you probably, but I'm just saying you might not have had the time to build that delusion. I hate to say that word. A lot of engineers have, which is to think that the technology matters rather than the value to the customer that matters.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as an early stage startup, I think this is almost even more important, right? Like you got to really, really be focused on creating value, right?
Yeah.
Because you're trying to get the product to market, you're trying to iterate on it and find product market fit and traction and all these things.
Yeah.
Where in the corporate world, it's easy to like just be writing code all day and who knows whatever happens with the code. You work on this project, like you said, for 3 years, it gets shelved and like nobody knows and nobody cares and whatever. You cannot do that in a startup. Like that will not work. Like the company will be dead. It will just not gonna work.
You don't have the luxury. Often people, I think, because of the way employment works, I think a lot of people imagine that stuff just happens and money comes in at the end of the month, regardless of how well we're doing, regardless if we're selling. And that's not the reality of business. That's not how things actually work. It's just companies essentially level off the amount of money that comes in by giving you a monthly income. But actually, there will be peaks and troughs, and there's a lot of sometimes seasonal related sales that people, just think stuff just happens because it's good enough, build it and they will come. They'll just come to it because it's just so good it sells itself. Question I had so many times asked by engineers, Adelina, how do I get this to sell itself? I don't want to sell it. Can I get it to sell itself?
Well, then then you're like not in business, right? Like that's the thing. One of the hardest things that I think most people don't understand is they think their code has like all this value too. Like everybody's worried about their code, the security of the code. Like what if somebody gets access to my code and all this kind of stuff? The security of your code is important. I get it. I'm not discrediting that. But the real value of a company is really their go-to-market strategy. How do you sell this thing is really the value, the core value of most companies. This just happens to be the widget that they sell. Right? Like you have built the widget that they sell, which is great. Like that's important too. But what really matters is the go-to-market strategy. And if you have a really, really good go-to-market strategy, you can also sell any widget. And you think about like a big brand like Apple or Microsoft and people like that, they have an incredible go-to-market team and a brand and all that stuff. They can literally sell anything. Like Apple can come out with the dumbest thing in the world and all the fanboys will run out and go buy it tomorrow, right? Whatever it is. Like that is the power, but it's hard as an engineer to understand like the big picture of all that. And I think until you're a startup founder and a business owner and you go through all of it, then it all starts to make so much more sense.
Yes, and I wish every engineer heard this conversation today. I mean, I think if they did, they hopefully would get some insights. And sometimes as an engineer, it's scary to think that you are in this environment, especially in a startup, where this could all go belly up
Yeah.
without much warning. You know, people are under the illusion that money will just come at the end of the month, but actually, if you're not selling and adding value in the marketplace, ultimately you're going to run out.
So I want to go back to our original part of our conversation here. We were talking about the CTO of an early stage company is almost more like a principal engineer. But then we kind of walked through and said, hey, look, there's 7 different kinds of CTO. They all have the same job title, right? And they all do different things. But I would almost argue that that's kind of the same point of like an early stage company with 5 developers. The CTO is a different role. Whatever they got the title, maybe they're more like a principal engineer, but it's just a different role, even though they all have the same title, right? Like, is that number 8 on the list? It's just a different role with the same title.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of ways you could carve this pumpkin, right? And
Yeah.
I think for me, the challenge is that there is no benchmark. You know, you could be. I met CTOs with 10 years experience of being CTO in 2 separate companies. You know, to their mind, they're an experienced CTO. I've been doing this for 10 years. I've been doing this for a decade. But
Yeah.
actually, when I start talking to them about business, what I discover is that they were never a true business CTO. You know, they were just the most senior, experienced engineer in a particular field that maybe cared about architecture, but they never
Right.
truly thought about business. And to me, I might sound harsh here, but to me, you are a true CTO when you align technology with business goals. Otherwise,
I'm
what
number
are you there
1.
for?
So I'm number 1. I'm number 1.
Yes.
That's what I heard. I heard I'm number 1 instead of number 4.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to put the 7 types of CTO that I mentioned in order of business, you know, most true to the role as such, then yes, that would be number 1. Absolutely.
All right. I'm number 1. Woohoo! Well, I think this has been a great conversation, and I would love for you to tell me a little more about what you do, how you can help people. If people are stuck, they need somebody like you. How should they reach out? How can you help them?
Yeah, when CTOs normally have challenges with building tech strategy, with the CEO, with they feel stuck, or they just want to accelerate engineering delivery, I can help them figure out within a week, actually, what's the source of their challenge. And then from there, tell them the solutions. And sometimes the solution is just knowing what the problem is and giving them some tips to how to fix it. That's why I say not everything is coaching. So yeah, if they can follow me on LinkedIn. I talk a lot about the sort of stuff I do. Also, the geekwhisperer.co.uk is my website as well. They can see everything that we get up to, all the services that we offer. Thank you.
Very, very awesome. And there was one other thing I forgot to mention earlier that I want to mention I think is important is we talked about understanding what you're good at and what you're not good at, and delegating and all that is really important. And one of the things I talk to other startup founders about is specifically this topic of, say, take somebody like me. Like, I know I don't really like to manage people and process. So you know what? That's okay. I can hire somebody to do that.
100%.
And just as if you're like the CEO of a company, the CEO of the company really needs to be the person who has like the company vision, the product vision, like where is this thing going? How are we going to sell this thing? Where are we going? That doesn't mean they need to be an expert at sales or marketing or development or whatever. You can hire people to do those things. Like you can delegate those sort of functions, hire people that are better than you at those different functions, right? And focus on like what makes you really good and what you're good at, what you want to do. To the same degree, this is sort of similar for a CTO, right? It's like I really like building architecture. I like prototyping things. I like business strategy, whatever it is. And figuring out what are you really good at and trying to stay in that and then not doing the other things, right? Like just like me, I wrote a blog post once about like I could never be a VP of engineering. There is no way. Like I could not do that job, right? And so I think it's important to just understand that. And the type of company you're in, the size of the company, the industry, all that stuff dramatically changes all this. Like you said today, I love your list of the seven types. I think and I like the fact that I'm number one. It's really good. But I think that's really important. It's important to be self-aware. And lastly, I talked to somebody else the other day, and I posted about this on LinkedIn. It's also important not to delegate all the things that you love to do. So for example, like me, I love to innovate. I love to build things. I don't want to be in the weeds, but I like to be kind of in the weeds and kind of helping innovate and prototype and do stuff. If I delegate that to somebody else, I get left with potentially like people management, process management, road mapping, strategy, and meetings. Like all the crap I don't really enjoy that much, like, but it's part of the job.
Yeah.
So I think the other point here is like you don't want to delegate away all the things that you enjoy and you love doing, or you will hate your job, right?
100%.
You will burn out as a CTO. My question for you, I guess my long-winded question for you is, do you see that? Like somebody comes to you and you're like, hey, I'm a CTO, I have all these problems. And as part of their challenge, like they're burnt out, they've delegated away some of the things that they enjoy doing.
Beautiful question. And I think I might have mentioned something about this earlier, but probably outside of the recording. One of the huge advantages that you have as a CTO is you can design your own job and keep the stuff you like. And this is why I say that coaching is not always a solution to every problem every CTO has. Because I often find when a CTO comes to me and says, I feel burned out, I feel like giving up, I don't know what to do, I actually do a discovery phase first, where I do some investigations by speaking to people they manage and their peers and board members and people above them to understand how they come across to the rest of the business. And then I can easily tell them if their problem is something that can be fixed overnight by kind of going, give up these things, keep doing these things, or if they need a complete job review. And that's one of the phase 2 options we sometimes have to do. We have to say to someone, you need a full job review because right now you are focused on the stuff that's not your strength. You hate doing it. You're exhausted doing it. And yet you keep doing it. But actually, you're not good at this stuff. You're more of a chief architect. Yeah. You're not a chief technologist that the company needs right now. This company needs a business strategy chief technology officer, which is number one, like
number
Matt
one,
Watson.
baby, number one. Woohoo!
Yeah, precisely.
All right, well, thank you so much for being on the show today. Again, this is Adelina Chalmers. You produce great content on LinkedIn, especially in regards to CTO and engineering leadership and management. Highly recommend people follow you. We'll probably have a link in the show notes for that. And then can learn more about you at geekwhisperer.co.uk. We'll have a link to that in the show notes too. Adelina, thank you so much for doing this today. And I hope you come back and we do this again.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for inviting me. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you so much.